Welcome to the Life Rocks podcast. In this podcast, we explore how nature, science, education, and culture can benefit all children and future generations. This is a show for educators, parents, mentors, and anyone interested in making the lives of our children, families, and communities better. So sit back, take a breath, and enjoy the show. And now for your host, Asher Cloran.
Hey everyone, Asher here, and this is the Life Rocks podcast. And today I'm super excited to announce our guest, Mark Turner, who is one of Canada's premier fossil hunters, if not the premier fossil hunter, who has found so many awesome things that children would dream of. Finding a career that Mark has had, uncovering things like T-Rexes and mammoth horns and ammonites that are just bejeweled with opal and all sorts of stuff. We're going to jump into all of the stuff that Mark does, but he's from Canada, British Columbia. A place called Tumbler Ridge was his first discovery, and since then he's found multiple dinosaurs all throughout Canada and has fossils in the Tyrell Museum in Alberta and the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, and currently spends most of his time exploring the rare ammonite gemstones found only in the area of southern Alberta. So without further ado, Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And you've got some tasty fossil treats for us behind you there.
Oh yes.
I'm keen to
So
jump
we've got-
into. We'll get into it for
mammoth
sure.
tusks and ammonite and all sorts of cool stuff. So
I didn't want to jump the gun and say that that's a mammoth tusk, but I was hoping that it is a mammoth tusk. So I'm super stoked that it is.
yeah.
So Mark and I met each other at a fossil show in Calgary, a fossil and mineral show in Calgary. And I was instantly drawn to his stall with all of these beautiful fossils there, and then captivated by the story that not only were these fossils truly awesome, that Mark had found them, most of them himself, or had been connected to the people finding them, and that really Mark was at the center of this huge fossil culture going on in Canada. So, finding out that all of this happened to Mark as a child, I was like, wow, we've got to get Mark on the podcast, because not only is, the earth science of fossils such a fascinating and captivating thing that captivates the minds of like all children, and at some stage, children love the idea of fossils, and then we kind of go along in life and it just seems like, such a far away career maybe for children, or how do you get into fossils, or how do you end up finding T-Rex bones? And like it seems like the stuff of movies like Jurassic Park. And I remember, Jurassic Park was one of my favorite movies as a child, and to think of even finding a T-Rex back then was like, it just seemed so far out there, but here you are. So how was that first discovery for you? And if you could just take us back into that time and space for you, and what it was like, and what that kind of meant to you at the time.
it was amazing. So it all started in the small town of Tumbler Ridge in northern British Columbia. And it was actually a friend and I's tubing trip. So we were both avid rock hounds and fossil hunters and just young guys, and we decided to go out, float down the river for a day, just making a day of it out in nature. And
How old are you
we ended
guys
up
at the time?
we were 8 years old and 11 years old at the time. And
Okay.
yeah, so we ended up falling off our tubes. We ended up on the wrong side of the river, and as we were walking back, we noticed some depressions in the rock, and So Daniel and I kind of looked at each other at the same time. We're like, "Holy, could those be dinosaur tracks?" And obviously, as a young kid, when you go and you tell your parents, "We think we found dinosaur tracks," they give you that, "Okay, sure you did, right?" But we were pretty adamant they were dinosaur tracks, and we ended up contacting some local paleontologists. It was a college at first, and they said, "Holy cow, you guys are on the right track. You actually have dinosaur tracks here." And they were found in an area where tracks and bones and fossils hadn't really been found before. So it turned out we started with 7 tracks, and then the paleontologists came there. They let us start to excavate the tracks ourselves, which was amazing. And by the time we were done, I think we had a total of 27 tracks in one continuous trackway along the rocks.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was the very first introduction to fossils. From there, we ended up being able to meet a whole bunch of paleontologists who came out to the site, and on that same site, we found dinosaur bones. So the trackway was actually an ankylosaur trackway site, and at the time, bones and tracks took two completely different sets of circumstances to fossilize. So you had,
Yeah.
tracks over here and bones over here. And what we found was a tiny overlap in the middle where the conditions were just right that they could fossilize at the same time. So it went
Wow.
from a one of a kind, in Western Canada to pretty much a one of a kind in the world. And yeah, it was just, the starting of an adventure, and it was just two kids tubing down a river. Could have happened to anyone. So it's a testament to how we saw things as kids, and the love and the passion that kids have for fossils and nature and outdoors. And yeah, I just kind of continued on with that passion ever since. It's been pretty amazing.
Far out, man. So there's a few things in there that I want to dive into a little bit. One is you must have had some pretty cool parents to have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old tubing around the mountains in what was the place called? Rocky Ridge?
Tumbler Ridge.
Tumbler
Yeah.
Ridge, which sounds
Yeah.
also a perfect place to go tumbling for crystals and gemstones and fossils.
Oh, it's amazing. It's a very small mining town, kind of up in the mountains, tucked away from everything else.
So what were your
And
parents doing there, and what made them want to raise a family like that, and what gave them that orientation towards allowing you to play in nature so wild?
it was kind of just natural. All the kids were always out and about. It was a small town, and we had a pretty adventurous family. So at the time, it was my mom and my stepdad up there, and then my dad was out in Alberta, which we'll come to that later because there's a whole other set of fossil stories there as well. But the family had always had me out in the woods and out exploring, and kind of never. Um, they wanted to encourage that sort of lifestyle as opposed to the sit at home, play games, that sort of thing. So they were happy if we were out and about and in nature and exploring and enjoying ourselves. So
Awesome. And you'd be in your 30s or 30?
yeah,
How old are you?
34 now, I think.
34.
That's
Yeah.
yeah.
A year or two on me. But, you know, you've been doing this your whole life, and that is super
Yeah.
cool. And, as you've shown, one discovery leads to another. So, you need that foundation of nature to sort of even have the way that you were thinking. So you alluded to another clue there, which is that you called yourself a rock hound. Can you
Yeah,
share a little
yes,
bit for
indeed.
those out there who don't know what a rock hound is? So at 8 years old, you considered yourself a rock hound?
Oh, absolutely. There were every kind of rock you could imagine was either in the backyard or in the basement, and I actually had a little setup where I would set up and I would sell pop out in front of the house, and I would always have all my little finds and fossils displayed that I would be able to tell people about. And oh, you can find this one up at the mine site. So there was a whole bunch of plants and trees. Or oh, this one came from down at the river. Or this one's just my favorite rock because it's red. Like it was,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. And so you cultivated these habits early on. You know, some kids will be looking at the sky, other kids will be looking at plants. You just happen to be looking at rocks,
Yeah.
which then led you to see these animal dinosaur prints. So how can when you got into rocks, was that just another natural thing that you picked up, or was it something that your parents sort of pointed you towards, or did you have any influences at all other than just being at nature and following your instincts?
It was it pretty much came naturally to me. I know I had seen like we used to watch all the adventure TV shows and the outdoor shows and things like that. And
Okay.
I think there was a couple of people who came and talked at our school, and they were doing the same thing, like just guest speakers, paleontologists, and things like that. And I just
Mm,
thought what they did was so cool and inspiring because you can
right.
find something that nobody else has ever seen before, and someone may never see again. So it's yeah. And I thought that was the coolest thing to be able to find that and maybe be able to share it with the world. So
Yeah, wow. To find something that no one's ever seen and no one will ever see before, and that unless you bring it out, no one might ever know about it either.
yeah.
So
So
that's
it actually yeah, through the hard work of the people in Tumbler Ridge, they started a museum foundation, and now Tumbler Ridge actually they house most of the paleontological resources found in the area. I think it's one of the biggest collections in Western Canada for vertebrate fossils and things like that. So out in the Peace region, and then after that initial discovery, people started going out. People started looking and finding just these amazing fossils that nobody knew were there. So
So it was really that discovery of the 27 fossilized tracks combined with the bones, which is in you know, fossils, as you say, there's usually one formation of like bone or animal material, and then there's prints, and they take two different conditions to happen. Do you just want to flesh out those conditions for people first of all? Because I think it is really interesting, like how these things form.
yeah,
What are those two conditions?
so for the tracks, you generally need a muddy surface, and they have to be covered up extremely quickly. And it's just the scarcity of having something, perish beside a trackway that they had never even really considered before. And usually, when you get, the mudstone, the bones will be sitting on the surface, carried away. They can deteriorate. They're exposed to oxygen and things like that. Whereas
Yeah.
tracks, being depressions, they're not so. They wouldn't be as brittle as the bones would have been at the time in those circumstances, where in other areas you get kind of a sandy area that gets covered quickly and then quickly compacted, or large flood areas, those will preserve the bones. Whereas if it was a large flood, that the tracks would just be wiped away. So it was kind of a one-off of really, really lucky circumstances.
Yeah. And so in like a mud flood scenario, or a as in like some sort of deluge happening and then a landslide coming down a mountain, and then that would cover those indents with maybe another type of material and then a less hard material would erode away over time and leave the prints. Is
Yeah.
that kind of
And that's
what you're
exactly
saying?
what happened. So it was a muddy surface where the tracks were left, and then they were quickly covered up by sediment of all different kinds. And lucky enough, there was a riverbed that had cut down through to the bedrock. So over the years, those layers of rock that had built up were slowly being washed and pulled away. And we just happened to be down there after a large flood that year. And on the right side of the river, where not many people had ever really gone or explored. And sure enough, it had just wiped off the top layer, and then we had those initial tracks just sticking out at us. And yeah, we weren't 100% certain until we sent the information away to the college and had lifted up another. I think it was just a small piece that was sitting there, and sure enough, we had the depressions in the rock as well as the cap, so you could see the footprint on both sides of those pieces.
Amazing. So that's sort of one way of forming fossils with the prints, and then, as you said, like bone material or flesh is more brittle and easily exposed. So what are the perfect conditions for fossilizing bones?
So for bones, it would be honestly, ocean beds are phenomenal. So like the areas that we have out here in Alberta, something dies, falls to the bottom, and there's really low oxygen levels down there, so you don't get the heavy breakdown of materials. You don't have all the predatory animals feeding on everything. And then again, just that quick sedimentary layers covering that up, and just millions and millions of years of pressure, and then all of a sudden you have a fossil.
There you go. So for the Albertosaurus skull, sorry, not the Albertosaurus, that was in a different location, but for the remains that you found next to these 27 tracks, how were they formed, and how are they related to the animal with the tracks?
So they weren't related to the animal with the tracks. It was
Wow.
just the conditions that were just perfect so that they could fossilize together. So it was that mud layer that covered the tracks. The bone would have been sitting there somehow. It didn't get wiped away or washed away. Nothing picked at it. And sure enough, it was just somehow the right conditions. It's kind of miraculous.
Kind of miraculous. Wow, there you go. So, you mentioned that this was like an overlap of like one of the only cases in the world. Seems like a bit of a destiny moment for you to kickstart your career.
Yep. I get often told that I am one of the luckiest people anyone has ever met when it comes to finding fossils, and I have to agree. It's just
In your
I seem to
blood.
be in the right place.
Yeah, you definitely have a nose for it. So tell us about the Albertosaurus skull find from Drumheller
That
and
was
what
just
significant
recently.
that held. Yeah.
So it was actually kind of a funny story, another one of those unbelievable moments. I do the ammonite mining. I have an ammonite claim here in southern Alberta. So in order to obtain ammonite, it's actually a gemstone, the ammolite that covers these
Yeah.
fossils. You have to have a claim. And on in this area, I had found a rare section of fish vertebrae. So I'd called the museum, said, "Hey, I'd like to come drop this off to you guys because it was a rare taxon. They didn't have a whole bunch of examples of this particular species at the Royal Tyrell Museum." So
Yeah.
called up the paleontologists, and I ended up about 45 minutes early to the meeting. So I decided I'd go for a little bit of hike and walk down to a local property where I had permission just to walk around. And not 10 feet from my truck door, I ended up finding an Albertosaurus skull. And it was an upper section of the skull with the teeth all still embedded in it. There was a couple that had fallen out and weathered out over time. And so after that, I had a new discovery to bring to the museum, and I brought the fish in. And then the curator of the Royal Tyrrell Museum actually came out with me to the site, and yeah, he was pretty amazed himself that it had been there for so long. He wasn't quite sure how I was able to see it because it took him a second to see as well. And when he did, he was floored. So
An Albertosaurus is like a T-Rex, isn't it?
yep, yeah, it's a tyrannosaurid of sorts. So large predatory meat eater that everybody wants to find and see.
So, that's not just like a tooth that you found in the ground. You found like a T-Rex like head outside your front door.
Yep. So the whole the maxilla is what it's called. So the front section
Yeah.
of the face. And again, what he had thought had happened with that one, because it was also fossilized over a large log, fossilized tree stump, was that it had been washed away in a flood, wound up sitting on these logs, and again got covered up by debris. And sure enough, millions and millions of years later, it was just kind of waiting there for me to find.
All right. So when, for instance, the Wikipedia entry on Albertosaurus, is that something that you'd say is accurate? And that have there been many Albertosauruses found?
In southern Alberta, there have been a few. They're not overly common, so but there are a handful of species that have been found, but to find a section of the head is quite rare.
Amazing. So, and then when people are thinking about dinosaur fossils, because obviously we go to the museum and people note that, okay, some of the fossils are made out of resin casting, and that's like, you don't want the real stuff on display because what if it gets damaged and this sort of thing. How many bones does one need to identify in a fossil before we can reliably say that it was X, Y, or Z? Is there kind of rules around that in paleontology?
So it's for the paleontologists, it can be quite easy because the bone density is different. So the size, shape of the bones. Behind me, I actually have hadrosaur vertebrae sitting here somewhere. So, yes. So right here, this
Okay. Yep.
is likely a
That's the
vertebrae
the
from
spine, yeah.
yep, from a hadrosaur. So this would be, I believe it was the tail section. If you look really closely, there's actually teeth marks in this one that have been fossilized in. So
Oh
on
wow.
this
It had
side
a
here,
battle.
yep, yeah, had a battle or something was chewing on it, and then after it got chewed on, it fossilized into this cool little bone right here. So
There you go. And so yeah, how would someone know that that's from a hadrosaur if they were like, oh, I just found one vertebrae?
So what I do is I actually take it to the Tyrell Museum. Pretty much everything I find has to go to the Tyrell Museum. So
Okay.
anything in Canada, well, Alberta, as far as bones, things like that, you have to report them, and then you're not able to sell them, but you become the custodian of the pieces if they're not of scientific importance to the museum. So
Yep.
that's how come I was able to keep that little guy in my personal collection.
There you go. Okay, so yeah, these museums, they're collecting all the different fossils from everywhere that comes in, and then as they get more and more complete pictures of things, they can start to look at species and refine those. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, yeah. So they have references that they can use from their fossils that they found that are articulated. So they've got, 15 or 20 bones all compressed in a row as opposed to just one random bone sitting on the surface.
Sure.
And then they say, oh, okay, yes, we can say with relative certainty that it's from this species or a very similar species like it.
There you go. Yeah, and just for the viewer here, I've pulled up a photo of the hadrosaur. We'll see what Mark reckons. Can you see that, Mark?
Yep, yep, the big duck-billed dinosaur. That's the guy.
So these would be sort of uh, marsh dwelling vegetarian type dinosaurs.
Yep, absolutely.
And then I pulled up one of an Albertosaurus. So this is part of the you found the jaw section of this Albertosaurus out your front. Was it the top or the bottom jaw?
The upper part. So the upper
The upper
portion with
part.
the nasal passage there
Oh wow.
and almost right back to the eye was the exposed section that we had found. So
Far out. And how big are those
and
teeth?
so the teeth, I would say, are probably about anywhere they range from about 2 inches to about 4 inches on the one that I found. There might have been one that was a little longer. So They're
There you go.
pretty large. Yeah.
And I guess as a fossil hunter, you've had some deep meditations about what it must have been like to be back in the realm of dinosaurs and
Oh,
some of these creatures. Can you share a little bit there about just, the world we live in now and how far away it is from then?
it was a completely different world. So the predators were absolutely massive. The prey animals were huge. But they ranged. There were so many different sizes, so they could be, as big as a house all the way down to as small as your fist. And I was actually just recently at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, and they have the a piece of the world's smallest Tyrannosaurus Rex there, as well as the world's largest Tyrannosaurus Rex. So the bone from the small one was about that big, whereas the bone from the largest T-Rex in the world, his name is Scotty, is absolutely massive. So there's I don't know if you can see that, a picture of me with one of Scotty's bones there, and that's at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum.
It's far out. Yeah, and I just want to note how well dressed you got to go and see the T-Rex, and that is very appropriate. If you're going to go and see some
Absolutely.
giant ass lizard that's millions of years old, he's pretty much
Right.
like the granddad of all dinosaurs. You got to get dressed up in a
Oh
suit.
yeah. Best attire, like you want to meet him on the best terms. It was quite an experience. So I was very lucky that they let me into the back rooms there and get up close and personal.
And you weren't just invited out there to, go and see that. You actually,
And
yeah.
he called it the Dino Hunters. He had found a really, really rare fossil with his daughter, and they actually decided this is amazing. Like it's a great way to get kids and families together.
Mm,
So I ended up kind of meeting him and having some conversations, and we decided to get together. And he did group tours. So I figured I would go out and help them and help identify some of the things they were finding, and it just kind of
wow.
took off from there. So we were actually invited out to the legislature in Saskatchewan, and we were honored by the Minister of uh, Culture, Recreation, and Heritage. And yeah, so we were mentioned in the sitting of the legislature, and we had brought some of the kids with us from the Dino Hunters group, and the cultural minister actually made dinosaur cookies for us all and had the kids decorate them up in her office. So it was it was quite an experience.
That is super awesome. I just wanted to show some of the images here from the guys at from Dynasty Hunters. These must be some of the kids. So they come out in the
Yeah,
field and
yeah,
help you look for
yeah. So
things.
this is the Dino Hunters. And yeah, that's John in the dapper blue suit up top there with his
Yep.
wife. And then if you look front and center, that's Lily, his daughter, who he had ended up finding the first fossils out that way with. So now they do a lot of the work with the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, and a lot of the stuff we find on these little groups and tours, we actually donate to them. If we find something of interest, it goes to that museum. So.
That's great. So there's a few themes here emerging, which is how do people get into fossil hunting themselves? What's the entry level step? And the other is that it seems that, you really want to touch base with all of these organizations and museums and agencies that are already so embedded in the work, and that they are looking for people to participate and pick up the tools and the exploration just like they love so much.
Absolutely. And the thing is, a lot of the stuff that the museums have, and a lot of these finds that are, world-class finds, are found by amateur paleontologists, just the people out there who, have read a couple of books and see a strange rock and don't know what it is. So it's something that literally anybody can do. And yeah, the entry level is honestly just to be out there and be open to finding absolutely anything, no matter where you are. It's possible, and you just notice there's something a little different about this particular rock. It just doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the area. And yeah, just seek help from any professionals. Even online, there's a lot of people will be like a lot of rock groups and things like that that'll, kind of guide you towards, oh, you found this or you found that, or here's a good location to go and find your first fossil if you're brand new to fossil hunting. So it's yeah, it's an absolute blast, and the community is amazing. So most of the rockhound community in Canada is more than willing to help people and more than willing to get kids and families and everybody involved. And I think the world would be a better place for it if there was more of it. Like it's just such a cool community to be a part of.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Life Rocks is not just a podcast. It is an education foundation centered around connecting children to the magic of nature through earth sciences. As a self-funded foundation and startup, we are constantly seeking support so that we can continue our great work. So if you feel called to donate to Life Rocks, please head down to the show notes and find the relevant donation link. We accept regular money as well as cryptocurrencies. We greatly appreciate you, our Life Rocks community. Now, back to the show.
What do you see some of the benefits are of being a rockhound? What are some of the things that rockhounds see about the world or know about the world that other people don't, that you reckon just have to get out there?
It's like if you were to visit a different planet that had life on it, because it is so strange compared to what we see in our everyday lives. You've got the concrete jungles and everything. When you're out there, these are huge creatures that lived millions and millions of years ago, and it paints a bit of a picture, and every person who's out there looking gets to add a brushstroke to that painting. And that's how I always see it. It's like a giant work of art of all these people who don't necessarily know each other, don't necessarily know everything about paleontology. They aren't the academics, and they come together and they can still help to paint the picture of what actually happened. And I just think that's so cool.
No, that is super cool. And yeah, it's such a different mind state if people have awareness of what's happened in the environment and can see a bit of that story. I feel that we are more connected as people to the world because we feel a part of that story too, but in the
Right.
concrete jungle, you say it's sort of everything's been leveled and paved over and branded, and it's sort of we've lost touch with that thread of the story.
Yeah, the connection. And when you're out there, you feel the connection. And you see the smiles on all the kids' faces too when they find something new that they've never seen before. Because, you can see the same thing in video games or have the same themes, in your daily life and your daily routines. And then you go out and you've got something that's just completely out of this world. And they're the ones who found it. They're the ones discovering it. So that just adds to their excitement, and the joy that they have is they can feel like they're adding to our history. They're actually being a part of it rather than being an observer to it.
100%. I have found very few fossils. I've found one rock that has a leaf on it, and I also
Nice.
have found some shells in a rock, like some conch shells. They just look like a bivalve in a
Yep.
kind of sedimentary rock. That was kind of cool. And I do know a couple of spots in Australia. There's one, Wee Jasper, which is this inland lake system just before the ridge of a mountain line, and it's sort of where the one plate of Australia meets the Pacific plate of Australia, and it's on the back end plate, so the plate's moving that way, and all the fossils are kind of along this ridge. And I'm just wondering, where are fossils found? Where can you go to find fossils? Is it mountain country? Is it marsh country? Is it coastal? Is it everywhere? And
Everywhere.
yeah,
Absolutely everywhere that there's exposed rock, There's a chance. There's some
Yeah.
areas that are obviously better known for fossils, and just because the conditions were better to preserve them. So southern Alberta being one of the best locations in the world for finding fossils and things like that. And places like Morocco, the deserts, like you can find a fossilized whale sitting out in the middle of a desert. So it shows you how much things have changed and that you can really find them absolutely anywhere.
Do you ever wonder whether we are going to become fossils and whether we're going to be in the right conditions to become a fossil ourselves, or that humanity will just be a fossil layer at some point, and that's kind of interesting too. You know, there's all these layers of history that we're just existing in a layer right now.
Yep, and that's exactly it too. Like, I really hope I can become a fossil someday, just because that would be awesome.
I
That's,
thought you might.
kind of come full circle. But yeah, and that's exactly it. You can look through the layers of history back like millions and millions of years, and you can literally see, okay, this is where some massive event wiped out everything that was living here, and you get to watch them slowly build up, and small things become bigger things, and all of a sudden you have this other layer, and then everything there seems to have perished for some reason or another. So there have been many mass extinctions. Everyone always talks about, okay, the big meteor strike and things like that, but there were many other mass extinctions in the history of the planet, and how things did survive, and from there, those things that survived were able to flourish and change into new and wonderful creatures and species. So it's we're kind of all descended from something at one time, somehow, some way. So it's a pretty amazing story when you really think about it.
It's a tremendously amazing story. I think one that we're still really grasping and even coming to terms with sort of the depth of it all and what it all means. I think back to that, as you say, the forms get bigger and bigger, and then there's a die off, and then there's some stuff happening over here, and then that dies off. And that maybe we think of these mass extinctions like they were just like one or two big global things, but that there's been more cycles of it than that, and that also disasters happen locally too. Like a,
Absolutely.
a bioregion might just go extinct, and then but over the other side of the planet things are kind of okay for a while. So
Right? Yeah, you get a volcanic eruption on, this little area over here, and that's going to wipe out, a majority of the species in, a large section, but anything else that's not affected by the ash, the clouds, or any of that devastation, like life continues, life goes on for those, whereas over here is a brand new beginning. It's yeah, yeah, it's mind blowing to think about. It's wild.
can you share some of these amazing fossils behind you? Something that is mind blowing, and I don't think people understand how it happens. I didn't until, I asked the question and followed that down the track. But how does that opalite ammonite fossilization occur? Because, obviously the organisms weren't this iridescent rainbow. It's the process of fossilization that creates that opalization through time. And what is that process? How does it occur? And yeah, tell us whatever
So
you want to.
ammolite, they're really unique. So ammolite were actually a mother of pearl. So it's like an abalone shell, those kind of iridescent shells. And when that fossilizes, it turns into a type of aragonite, a really special type of aragonite, and it only occurs here in southern Alberta in the Bear Paw shales. So I'll actually grab this guy to show you up close here. And
So you're saying it was iridescent before it was fossilized, and then
yeah,
that's just
but just
enhanced
not.
it.
Yeah, just
Wow.
not quite to this level. So
Okay. Far
yeah,
out.
so yeah, it looked a lot like mother of pearl, or some of our nautilus today that have that type of shell.
Yes,
And
and even
just
like the crystal labradorite, it's like that.
yeah, and that's a like different process still that forms those. But so ammolite, a lot of people say it's very similar to opal and things like that, but
Hmm.
it's actually its own unique chance, a chance, freak chance of nature that caused them to form. So it's
Because you mentioned
it's
aragonite as something that creates that hardness in the iridescence, and that's something that shellfish use to create their shells, isn't it? And it's found at rich places in the
yeah, it's
ocean.
a yeah. So calcite it's a type of calcite, and then aragonite it can be found in its other forms, but ammonite is ammolite. Sorry, is a type of aragonite. So it's just the mineralization that happens to those shells as that calcite transforms.
And how old would something like that be?
So the ammonite, those are about 72 million years old. So yeah,
And
they're
what about the creature that lived inside the ammonite? Like, what was
so it
it
was a
doing?
squid. It
Okay,
was a form of a giant squid. Yeah. So they were just pretty much milling about in the oceans, and they hovered through the water column, and there's evidence that they would either attack each other or it might have been breeding, but there's actually, you can see on very, very rare pieces the suction marks of the ammonite, and they've actually found the fleshy material fossilized in extremely rare circumstances as well. So that's kind of how we know what the creature looked like inside of the ammonite.
okay. So, and this shell grew off its back, so it's kind of like a squid with a snail shell.
Yep, yeah, exactly. So the closest thing would be the current day Nautilus.
There you go.
It's Yeah, yeah, that'd be your closest relative. And the other cool thing that we find in the Bear Paw Shale is mosasaurs, so large marine reptiles. And they were actually the predators of these ammonites. So ammonite were their main food source.
Okay, so this is like the marine predator, the marine alpha predator kind of fish.
Yeah. The big marine guy. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I've actually got an example of a jaw here. This one isn't from Canada, it's from out in Morocco, but just to show you kind of how big these things got.
There you go. I pulled an image up on the screen here, but Mark's going to show us the fossil. Oh wow. Okay. That is a serious jawbone. Would you look at that? That is incredible. Oh, hang on.
So
I'm
this
still
one's in
on.
its cast still, but
There we go.
so
Look
that
at that. That is absolutely wild. I'm just going to make sure I've got the full screen happening on.
that was the predator of those big ammolite ammonites. And the thing
Look
is, the
how.
Bear Paw Shale, even though it's about in that 70 to 76 million year old range, ammonite themselves have been around way longer and can be found worldwide. So around 140 million years, you can still find ammonite, the species, but again, only the ammolite only exists in Alberta. And
It's
there is
absolutely
some in
incredible.
Montana, little bits in Montana. I actually have. This is a different species of ammolite ammonite.
Yeah.
So this is an interclare,
Okay.
Placenticerus interclare. So what it has is a second row of spines along the edge, whereas most have just this inner row. And again, you can
Got
see
you.
the iridescent color in this one. So yeah, there's a few different species that we have out here in Alberta.
How
So
did you
there's
find that
pleasant.
mammoth tusk?
Oh, this mammoth test. So this is actually there's a world famous hunter fisher guide, and his name is Jim Shockey, and
Okay.
he has a Hand of Man museum on Vancouver Island. So I ended up going down to his museum and ended up meeting him. I was donating some items to him, And again, he loves having kids and families and everything go through. So he was up in the Yukon and ended up obtaining this from gold miners in the Yukon. So there's a big process when you find a fossil like this up there. You have to get disposition on it and all sorts of different permits and things. But once he went through that process, he was able to bring them back to his museum. And then that's where I kind of ended up talking to him and traded him for, I think it was one of my ammonite fossils that has disposition, because we also need the paperwork on all of those. And yeah, so that's how I acquired this.
So it was a
Here,
trade.
take it out and I'll give you a close up here of this one as well. If I can get her out of the stand here. Takes a bit
Is it
of
heavy?
effort. She's got some good weight to her.
Yeah. Wow. Super impressive.
And now
It was such a
something
big
that
animal.
just massive. And
You can see
something
the
that I
core.
find
It's got
cool
like
though.
a core in it, doesn't it?
Yeah. So let's might be able to see there.
Different
So it
layers.
grows in layers.
It's kind of like a
You can see where the core
toenail
is
or something.
busted out.
The
So,
biggest
and the
toenail
cool thing
ever.
about mammoth tusks is
Yeah.
that you can actually tell the difference between a mammoth tusk and a more common elephant tusk. So with the
Oh,
mammoth tusk, there's something called Schrieger lines. And with the mammoth, they tend to be at a 90, whereas the elephant will be more, yeah, kind of open, I guess. And
okay.
so what that does is it actually allows people to differentiate between mammoth ivory or elephant ivory. And if there's a whole bunch of mammoth ivory on the market, it helps to stop people from poaching elephants, because now you've got a
Right.
flood of ivory that's still this high grade. So there's not the desire for people to be
Hunting
going out and
elephants.
hunting and poaching these elephants. So, whew, that's a
Wow.
heavy one.
Yeah, well, I think, if you were really into ivory, probably mammoth ivory is just as cool, right, guys? You don't need
Right?
fresh elephant ivory.
Yeah, I think it's way cooler.
That's way cooler.
Absolutely. And yeah, and then yeah, it's a good way to kind of help fight against the poaching of elephants, is if there's all of this ivory available on the market that is a high grade, then hopefully people aren't going to be wanting to take those risks. And we can maybe preserve another part of nature through these fossils as well. So it's it's quite a wild story with them.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I guess there's that whole thing within the fossil realm of like there'd be really valuable fossils that would be like, yeah, if you find them, you'll probably make some good money, and then other fossils that are just like more common.
Yep. So ammolite ammonite are actually, it's Alberta's official gemstone, and it's one of the rarest gemstones in the world.
Very
So
cool.
a single ammonite fossil can fetch upwards of around $40,000 to $50,000.
Very
Whereas
nice.
mammoth tusks, like this one, they're probably in the $15,000 to $20,000 range, depending on the quality and things like that. Some you can find less, but
There you go.
it's
So you got to be in the right region to have those kind of rare fossils or rare gemstones around, hunt them out. And a
yep,
gemstone
absolutely.
is sort of defined by its hardness, its value, its durability, its prettiness, and its sort of its human value in the realms of commerce and art and culture. It's not a definition based upon sort of it's a loose human definition for an industry term, I think, is a gemstone. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people overseas tend to see it as sort of a feng shui symbol of luck, and
Okay. Yeah.
that's why it's really sought after. So Hong Kong is one place where they absolutely covet ammolite above almost anywhere else.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah.
So if you have some Chinese friends from Hong Kong and you feel like impressing them, ammolite,
Yep.
that's the way to
Yeah.
go.
Bring that out, and yeah, yeah, most definitely. So, and yeah, it's really hard to find again, just because it only exists here. And in order to actually even collect it, you need to have your own claim. So you need an ammolite claim. On top of that, you need a Historical Resource Act exemption. And then in order to ship it outside of Canada, you need an export permit. So a whole bunch of paperwork and steps to go through to get that process going. But it was one way that I would be able to go out and actually find and keep fossils, was to go through all those steps.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you're allowed to dig them, then you find all these other cool things as you're going along. So the ones that you can't keep, the bones and stuff. At one area I was out at, I actually found a mosasaur skull. So that's now at the Royal Tyrell Museum as well. And it's you never know. You never know what you're gonna find out there.
You have found the most ferocious creatures that anyone has ever discovered on planet Earth, just in the ground.
Yep, absolutely. And then yeah, more recently, actually, I'll be headed out to the Tyrell Museum with a portion of a turtle and it's an unknown vertebrae. So they'll probably know what it is when I get it there, but currently they're not quite sure because it's from another area of Alberta where they don't find a lot of vertebrate fossils.
So these are some of the oldest turtles in Canada ever found. How big are these guys, and what were they up to when they died?
They range in size. So they ended up, it was the same thing. They kind of died in the water column, floated down to the bottom, were covered by silt and sand. And yeah, so they're generally they can be the same age as the ammonite or the mosasaurs. And yeah, they have quite a wide range of ages and sizes. So the some of the largest ones I've ever heard of are, probably about 8, 9, 10 feet tall, just the shell of the animal. So they were absolutely massive.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is a big tortoise. And they're traveling in large groups, and they were just traveling while they died. Is that sort of the theory?
They're not sure whether they traveled in
Hmm.
groups or not. At least I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the fossils, usually they'll find an isolated turtle or an isolated other one. Ammonite, occasionally you'll find one or two that have fallen and stacked on top of each other, which is extremely rare. I've only ever seen two
Yeah.
of those now. So,
Okay.
but yeah, and then there's another really cool super predator that existed, and that was the Megalodon. So this was the largest shark that ever lived.
Okay. Very scary stuff. Wow. Look
And
at
that
that
is a
tooth
single
and
tooth.
how sharp it is
So
still, and
yeah. So
perfect.
for every inch of megalodon tooth, it's expected 10 feet of body. So a tooth that's 6 inches like this would have been a 60-foot long shark.
Whoa.
So
Is
it's almost
that's the size,
unbelievable.
that's over the size of a bus. Like that's like a
Yep.
double tube bus.
Yeah. So they were absolutely massive. And those
Pretty much
guys
like
lived about,
a big great white shark, yeah, megalodon.
yep, yeah,
Yeah.
essentially. And yeah, they lived from 2.5 million years ago to about 23 million years ago, roughly. So they're another really cool fossil. And I haven't personally found a megalodon tooth, but I did hear about one recently found towards the Edmonton area, which is extraordinarily rare as well.
Edmonton, yeah, okay. And so not too many megalodons found throughout Canada.
Not throughout Canada, but if you go to places like Indonesia and the coast in the States, they actually have quite a few. So people go scuba diving to find the fossils of them.
Okay. Yeah, wow. So, Mark, you've done a lot of work also with children, and obviously some of your amateur fossil hunters along at Dynasty are kids who have just really gotten into it. Can you share a story or two from your time with teaching with kids, maybe how it's impacted them, or some
Yeah.
stories
So
you've heard?
one of my favorite times and things to do is to go and talk to schools. So just recently, about a month ago, we went and did a big school talk in Lethbridge here, and the kids had so many questions, and they were just so amazed by these creatures that existed before, and so many of them have stories about, I was out with my grandpa and this is what I found. I think those stories are one thing that I personally think is the absolute coolest, because it just goes to show that there are still kids that are really interested in this, and they're going out with their families, they're spending time in nature, and that's just, it's always really uplifting to see, right?
That's
So
awesome.
and then just their excitement, you show them something like a big mosasaur jaw or a mammoth tusk, and then everyone's all extremely kind of standoffish, and you tell them, oh no, it's fine, that one's actually mine, you can touch it, you can play with it. They just go wild. So yeah, that was it's that excitement and the zest for learning and trying to figure out, what existed so long ago, that just it puts a smile on your face. Like, how can't it just, you know
And you're evoking so much curiosity and awe, and I bet for someone like you who's been into it for so long, to imagine having yourself as your own mentor back then. Do you ever think of that?
Absolutely. And that's, yep, often. And that's kind of why it brings me back to, when I was in school before we found the tracks, and those people who came and would talk to me and show me these wonderful things. And it's like, from that spawned just this entire lifestyle and passion, and, want to share it with the rest of the world, and share it with people and families, and let families know that it is literally right outside their doorstep. It's, not something you have to go to school for years and years to be able to do. You don't have to be, you know, any echelon of society can go out and find a fossil and, enjoy themselves.
Absolutely right. Nature's there for everyone to enjoy. And yeah, I think your story really highlights the fact that take the curious path, take the path less beaten, and keep your eyes open and keep your
Always.
mind learning, because the world is full of curious things to explore and discover. Even from millions of years ago, we are still discovering the ancient past.
Yep. Yeah, and
So,
it's here. It's all right here, which is just so cool. Millions of years have passed, but it's right within our grasp, and we can still see it. We can still see what happened so long ago.
and what do you think about the entire field of research when it comes to extinction events and the cycles of time throughout the planet? So, we've gone through the ice Earth, and we've gone through different stages of atmospheric gases, of situations which allows different organisms to take place. From your hypothetical perspective, or your own synthesis of learning all of these different perspectives over the years, what do you think is some of the hidden elements of history on Earth, and maybe where are we headed?
Well, I think it gives us a good idea of what can happen. So the things that have happened, they can obviously happen again. It would take, extreme circumstances, but it gives us a bit of a picture of the cycle of the planet that we live on. And it shows us that our planet, as we're growing and changing and evolving, our planet's doing the very same things. So it'll kind of give us insight into, where it's headed, what could happen, where we're going to be going in, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 years from now. It could be completely different. It could be, very similar. There's just no way to tell. So it's yeah, I think it's just an exciting field of study, and yeah, shows us where we've been and where we're going, and gives us an idea.
100%. I think it's very probably makes life a bit more realistic looking through the lens of fossils and thinking, hey, maybe this whole modern life that we have right now and we take for granted so much could eventually just become a fossil layer. So maybe we should sit back and enjoy it a little bit more.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and make the most of what we got. And I think
Yep.
if people were filled of passion and curiosity and love for nature, that the world would be a better, healthier place, and maybe we wouldn't have to be so concerned about the environmental stuff and humanity's impact, because it might actually be a bit more positive and a bit more caring.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah. And it also it proves as a good example that it's anything can happen. Absolutely anything can happen, and we've we've got kind of one chance to do it right and to go out and enjoy it and learn what we can. So we've got to make the best of it, and I think there's some pretty amazing things to be making the best of, and there's a lot of positive things that we could be focused on in the world right now. So there's a lot of negative as well, but I think if a lot more people were focused on the positive, it would be a beautiful place. And yeah.
Here to that, Mark. And yeah, thanks so much for spreading your message and doing the work that you do, because you definitely live by that example. And one life full of passion can influence 1,000 others around them to, pick up their own pieces and move forwards with something cool. So, yeah, that's really awesome. On this show, Mark, I like to ask everyone, if you had one wish for the future of humanity's children, what would that wish be?
I would say to learn from our mistakes and to go out and explore, spend time with family, adventure, find the passion in life, and yeah, just the awe, be inspired, be amazed by the world we live in, because it is an amazing place. And I think a lot of people do get too focused into their everyday routine and the everyday lives to stop and actually have a look at where we live and what's actually going on.
That is a really, yeah, really, really beautiful message, Mark. Hey, man, so I'd love to show everyone your shop right now. So I'm just going to do a screen share over to here. And, this is the Dynasty Fossils shop, and, full of specimens that I imagine that you or your team has found or sourced. Everything from
Yep.
jewelry to fossils. Some really beautiful stuff here. So if you do feel like looking at Mark's work, finding out more about their team, some of the stories, following them along on Facebook, and you're on Instagram as well.
Yep. Not as often as I would like to be, but yeah, I've got most of my stories are on Facebook, and I
Excellent.
think I've got a link I've sent to the personal account there, and there's some cool stories. It's always an adventure.
I've enjoyed following along, and you've always got awesome stuff coming out. And so follow along on the Dynasty Fossils Facebook channel to keep updated with what's going on with Mark and the Dynasty crew. And yeah, head along to their shop and have a look at all of the awesome fossils and jewelry that are coming along out of there. And yeah, I'm really stoked to have had this conversation today with you,
It's
Mark.
been awesome.
And whenever you find a new discovery, I'll be staying tuned and invite you back on the show, and maybe we can go into a bit more detail around, a particular discovery and a particular site, unpack for the audience a little bit more what is it to find a site from start to finish, and some of the details that go involved there, because we just get the Jurassic Park version of fossils in the mainstream. So this has been an absolute pleasure to peel back a few of the layers. And I think what I've learned from this discussion is that, children can go for whatever their dreams are. If you have a kid who's interested in fossils, they can become a fossil hunter. If you have a kid who wants to be an astronaut, send them to space.
Absolutely.
The sky is the limit, and Mark is evidence of letting the path unfold towards something that, sparks your curiosity. So thanks everyone today, and thank you, Mark. Any final words for our audience?
Thank you. Just go out, explore, be inspired, and never stop dreaming, because it's right at your fingertips, right out your front door. There's always something new, and who knows, you could be the first person to find something that nobody's ever seen before.
Right on, everybody. That's awesome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. And remember, like and subscribe, because that really helps us do everything and get awesome guests like Mark on the show. So thanks, everyone. Life rocks.
Thank you so much for listening to the Life Rocks podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then leave us a review. We'll be back soon with more inspiring content, and in the meantime, remember, life rocks.